Today, we're joined by Zack Kass. And Zack, I'm so pleased to have you here and honored. Zack is head of the Rutherford Advisory AI Advisory Council, but more importantly, has a unique, absolutely unusual perspective, having been there from the beginning, working with OpenAI on the development of AI, and then also working now with businesses all over the world. One never knows where Zach is. I can call him. He'll be in Singapore next. Next day he'll be in Saudi Arabia. So he truly has a very, very deep understanding of AI, how it's being used, how it evolved, and really can give us some insight into where it's going. So I want to start by really talking about your book because you spent an awful lot of time thinking about this, and you spent the efforts, or you took your efforts to really put in one place all of this experience that you have and the day-to-day interaction you have with companies of all sizes. And I wanted to just get some thoughts on what made you write this book, and what is the essential thesis of the book.
Well, first of all, Kathy, good to see you, and thanks for including me. As always, the the book. Well, I'm too close to the book today, so I'll start by saying if I sound self-deprecating, it's simply because I am experiencing what every nonfiction writer has ever experienced, which is the closer you get to the words, the harder they become to read. But I'm really, in the end, I think I'm proud of a book that is probably honestly 16 years in the making. Well, it's longer than that. I mean, I introduced the book reminding the readers that I was born with a rosy disposition and sort of came out the womb believing that today was the best day ever to be born and tomorrow would be too. And when I went to Berkeley, I studied history and computer science. And when you study history, you learn that the world does in fact get better. When you study computer science, you learn why. So I had evidence then to support how I always viewed the world. And then I joined a early machine learning company and spent my career in AI. So the last 16 years have only worked in artificial intelligence. And the book is, yeah, a story of history, a story of my personal life and experiences working in AI, and a story of how I think the future will unfold. And it's an argument for progress, not even around, not even AI, but broadly scientific and technological progress as a story of human progress. And my goal and my personal mission and my goal in the book certainly is to argue and promote the idea, or even perhaps prove that reason and hope should coexist, that these are not in conflict, but in fact in unison, and that the progress that we are seeing today, as scary, unnerving, and sort of uncertain as the future may be, is painting the backdrop of what I think will be profound. And I borrow from John Maynard Keynes, the godfather of modern economics, who wrote a paper in 1930. I think you and I have discussed this, called "The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren." And in this paper, he argued quite simply that the world wasn't just getting better, it was getting a lot better. And he did it at a time where people were literally dying of starvation in the streets. So it was seen as tone deaf at best and sort of idiotic and Pollyanna at worst. And he said, and I quote, he said, "I must disembarrass myself to imagine a future that I will certainly not live to see, one in which we will have solved the economic problem and be faced with something far more profound." And the book I'm writing is sort of an homage to that idea, that in fact our next great journey as humans is probably spiritual, rediscovering what it means to actually be human against a backdrop of technology that makes everything else so easy.
So, Zach, you know what I love, and everyone I know who's met you, and so many people when you give talks, whether it's at WEF or whether it's in corporate settings, love your optimism. It's just so profoundly touching and really inspires all of us. But we have to recognize that headlines love doom, and we see every day that we're going to be taken over
Who do
by
we have to blame for that one, Kathy?
that jobs will disappear. I mean, the litany of bad things that are coming our way is actually quite long. And what I love about your book, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, was not just that progress and humans evolve, and adapt, which you talked about, but that there's a great leap in front of us. And this is just not a small change, but there's something profoundly different about the moment that we're in. And maybe you can help us think about that a little bit.
Okay, so I think the problem with arguing that this moment is different is that everyone has always argued this moment is different, and the real, but actually, no one is wrong. No one's ever been wrong because for as long as we've been sort of recording history, history's been moving faster and faster. Um, and the parabolic curve probably started around electricity, right? If you had to go back and pinpoint it anywhere, electricity is probably the first great exponential technology. Um, and maybe shipping, maybe boats or railroads, but or the steam engine. But electricity, when we look at it, really starts. I mean, that's really where curves start to move up and to the right in terms of population growth, in terms of education, in terms of life expectancy. Lots of things start happening on a super linear basis. Some bad, by the way, not all good. Some bad, but most very good. Most of the measures of human progress. And by the way, station identification. I should recognize that I measure human progress on sort of two axes. How free are we to be alive, and how inexpensive is it to do so, right? And lots of people point to the recent decline in happiness as a sign that in fact things are getting worse. And my point is that to me is actually more circumstantial, and it's not clear that this is like a permanent trend. Whereas like if we all started dying very young, or if suddenly like violence erupted, that to me would be one of these like terrifying sort of global trends, because it's not clear that you can actually get yourself out of those. Happiness as a result of screen addiction does seem like something that we can correct. But if you measure human progress in those two axes, it's very clear that human progress has done very well over the last 200 years, and it's done better and better everywhere. And when people talk about inequality, what I have to remind them is, in fact, the world is catching up to all of the goodness that the United States has sort of uniquely enjoyed for a long time. And places like China and India have catapulted themselves out of poverty at a rate that's almost unnerving, and quite frankly, to now front and center on a national security basis. Well, China's doing awfully well. That's pretty scary. It's like, well, sure, that's the cost. That's the cost of 1.5 billion people no longer needing to fight for meals. And so I think what I'm arguing is not even that AI specifically or precisely is causing progress. It's that we are experiencing technological progress and therefore progress in the human experience. Now, it's also true that AI is moving now at an incredible rate. And two things are happening with AI that I think are well documented but bear repeating. The first is that AI is getting better all the time at performance, right? And this is well understood. First there was GPT-3 and then 4 and then 5 and 6, and that's impressive. That alone is actually not even the best part, right? The best part is how inexpensive AI is getting on an inference basis, right? We all talk about the cost of training, the cost to actually produce the frontier technology. That's very expensive. And most of the data centers we are building is going to training the next frontier model. What's very exciting to me, at least right now, is the inference decline in cost, right? So the ability for an individual with internet access to use ChatGPT is increasing all the time because the cost to actually running ChatGPT is increasing. That is worth celebrating, but it's also bears reminding everyone that the way that we make the world less expensive, one of the two critical axes of progress, is by making the critical resources that we use less expensive. And I sort of propose that by making AI as a sort of a utility near zero in cost, we are setting the world up for way more abundance than we could probably imagine today. And the only things that we can borrow from are water. I mean, not the only, but the ones that we can borrow best from on a historical basis are water, foodstuffs, electricity, and the internet. Right? These are these critical resources that each tell a different story at various points, that were once very scarce and then became abundant. And my argument in the book, one of the principal arguments, is that unmetered intelligence is the theory that intelligence is in fact a resource. And that like water and foodstuffs and electricity and the internet before it, it will go from very expensive to very cheap. And when it does so, the world will become less expensive to live in. But also, unmetered intelligence, as you pointed out, presents other profound consequences. And as a great leap goes, one of them principally will be scientific discoveries. And it is not that AI is going to do the work, it is that AI is going to unlock the work. Because what I have to remind people of is if the cost of intelligence goes from very, very, very expensive to very, very cheap, which it is doing, then we can start to ask the question, not what if we had a million more people studying the cure for cancer? We can't do that. I mean, we could, but it would take thousands of years. We can ask the question, what if the 10,000 people who are studying the cure for cancer today were 10,000 times more productive? And that is happening all the time. And so my argument in the book, and my argument to anyone who will listen, is that AI serves as this unlock for all of these discrete problems that we have banged our head against the wall about. One is the cure for cancer, one is neurodegenerative disease, but then there are molecular and particle science questions, like how do we solve fusion energy? Because if we solve fusion energy, suddenly we have to stop wondering how we consume less energy. Suddenly the conversation around energy no longer becomes an ecology trade-off. The Faustian bargain today is you and I have everything we want, but we are destroying the planet. And I argue in the book that is not a Faustian bargain that we have to make much longer. We don't actually have to do with a deal with the devil in order to feed everyone. We may not have to slaughter billions of animals a day. We may not have to burn trillions of tons of coal and release a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere, because we're going to unlock these scientific breakthroughs that allow us to actually start doing way more with way less damage. And that is sort of the chain of logic in the book, that discrete problems are about to sort of compound.
But you talked about the pace of change being so massive, and I think that even in our imagination, we can't really chart out how fast things are going to continue to evolve. But you said something in Davos that really stuck in my mind and actually changed the way I, do my job, and what everything that I've been telling a lot of my colleagues. You said, don't. It's the biggest mistake you can do in hiring decisions is actually to hire somebody for a particular job. That you have to hire somebody who's flexible and adaptable because that job is going to change. And so that's, people, companies, I keep telling everyone this, Zach. And again, every time I look at a candidate, it echoes in my mind. So I think that, how do we readjust ourselves with these huge bureaucracies and think about this in a totally different way? Because the jobs, of course, are changing. We have to think about how we're upskilling, what we're looking for. That is a very profound thought that I think is really a massive change in the way everyone looks at bringing people and training people.
Well, first of all, I will remind everyone it's easy for me to say that we should don't hire someone for a specific job. I have a luxury of saying that. I also believe that it is true. I think there is plenty of work, and we have a section in the book titled "Future of Work," and there's a lot there. What I think is a critical, what I sort of think about when I talk about the future of work is two things. The first is one, let me say the big one and then we'll leave it. I'm not convinced that we all have to work in the future in order for us to be successful and to grow as a society. Moreover, I'm somewhat convinced increasingly that there is a future in the distance, I don't know where people actually prefer to recreate and can do so. That is a deeply upsetting idea to many people. And in fact, it's my hottest take, I realized. But we'll set that aside. On the path there, what's clearly happening now is not that humans are not required to create value and to move the world forward. It's that the work that the humans need to do in order to create that value is changing. And it's very obvious that the work that any individual in most knowledge work and frankly a lot of the economy needs to do will change early and then often and then quite a bit, frankly, such that some jobs go away completely, some jobs are reborn, but jobs do evolve in ways that they really haven't in a lifetime. There are sort of a bunch of problems that jump out, but one of the stories that I tell anyone who will listen is that of the dock workers, right? I remind people that the dock workers in October 2024 went on strike. And the head of the dock worker union, Harold Taggett, instructed that 45,000 of the dock workers on the eastern seaboard to walk off the job site. And they did so on October 1st, 2024. And he went on CNN on October 2nd, 2024, pointed at the camera and very calmly said, "The American people have no idea how dangerous I am. I will cripple you." And what I have to remind everyone is that his asks were not for more money and not for safer working conditions, which have been the two tenets of every labor union since we organized labor. They were for a guarantee from the ports that the ports would not automate their jobs. And the picket signs read, robots don't pay taxes and automation harms families. And now I will spare you of the results, and the readers can read the. I went and interviewed. Well, I sent Harold an email, and he sent me something very unnice back. But we interviewed a bunch of the dock workers, and the results are in the book. What I will remind people of is that everyone listening to this podcast right now is a descendant of someone whose job was automated to our economic benefit. And the dock workers are fighting automation that would in fact serve to benefit everyone, including eventually their children. As crazy as it sounds, right? That eventually work gets automated to the economic gain of everyone who comes after you. And that in fact, we wander the earth all day, every day, asking ourselves, when is that good or service going to be better, faster, cheaper, without realizing that what we're asking is, when is a human going to be extricated from that good or service? And the problem now is that we are staring at this problem, hoping that everyone else's jobs get automated, just not our own. And that's somewhat of an exaggeration. Obviously, we all want bartenders, and we all want, we all want baseball coaches and teachers. But like, honestly, a lot of people are like, I don't want an accountant to have to do taxes. I don't want a lawyer to have to negotiate this agreement. I don't want taxi drivers to drive me around. I don't want bus drivers to drive my kids to school. I want all this to be much safer, which is totally reasonable. And I think that the point now is inside of a company. So that's happening on a collective societal basis. And that war is going to rage. And in fact, when people ask about job safety, I have to remind everyone, this is not a technological question anymore. Do not try to make sense of what job is going to automate based on whether the machines can do the job or not. Ask whether the profession will have political protection. And when someone says, what job is going to automate first? I say, show me the weakest union. That's it. And the reason that a lot of people are right to assume that computer science will automate or software engineering will automate first is not because Claude Code is exceptional. It is. It's because the software engineers never organized. They don't have a labor union. It's legal to automate software engineering, whereas for most professions, they are protected politically. Now, why I tell this story is to remind people that identity displacement is happening on a macro basis and a micro basis. Inside of every company, this is also happening right now, everywhere on earth. There's a collection of people who are like, God, I really hope I don't get automated, but Jerry, that guy sucks. And moreover, I'm tired of waiting for him to do a thing. Can't we just get Jerry out of the way so that I can move faster? And the problem inside of every organization is that there's this sense that so-and-so shouldn't have a job, but so-and-so should, or so-and-so's job is valid, but so-and-so's isn't. And the way this is playing out is with, there's incredible fear, incredible white knuckling, but more importantly, at an individual basis, everyone is trying to insist that their job is critical, not because necessarily they think they're going to get fired, but because they want to find purpose. And what I remind CEOs of is if you hire people for a specific job, you will inevitably face the very hard problem of convincing them that that job isn't necessary, even if they are. And that extricating their identity and purpose from that job will actually become a full-time fucking job. Sorry for the swearing. But that every CEO, every CHRO is actually just going to have to convince people that they have a future, but this job doesn't. And if you hire people who are excited about the work itself, then you will find yourself being able to say to Jerry, hey, this thing that you do, collating these documents, not super helpful, and we don't need you to do that anymore. Instead, we want you to do this. Now, if you sort of zoom out, what we're challenging sort of globally and collectively is the idea that we should start convincing people that the process of creating value and the opportunity to participate in society may no longer be attached to a career, a ladder that you climb in a linear fashion in the way that our parents came up at IBM graduating these rungs. And that was a very important part of American culture, corporate culture in particular. Those days are over. And frankly, they've probably been over for a little bit. And you know what? Good riddance. It's not clear it made them very happy. It helped them find some purpose. It helped them with job security. Totally unclear that a 9-to-5 for 40 years is actually good for the soul and spirit. And arguably, it's terrible for it. What we now need to do is start recruiting, coaching, managing people to see the world as a place that they can explore and jobs as things that they can do in order to create value, in order to make money, but not that they must do on some trajectory to achieve some ultimate job. Because CEOs that hire those people are going to be very disappointed when they realize that not only is that job not the thing that they need, but that this person doesn't want to do anything else.
So there's another game-changing thought you had, Zach, which I think that people totally don't understand that you can break the mold on. Is this question of bias. So, when you talk about bias, it totally has a different lens. People feel that bias is such a bad thing. It's a self, multiplying kind of a factor that actually distorts things and creates this polarization. And I think you had a different way of looking at bias. I think it's really important to like shed light on that and how we should think about it and what we should do about it.
So, yeah, well, thanks for the setup. There are two problems. The first problem is really simple, which is that we made bias a pejorative a while ago, irrespective of AI, right? And it's used in like very sort of unsavory ways. It's the bias that means that the coach's son plays more than everyone else. It's bias that says a judge sentences someone more aggressively because they're racist. It's bias that says a cab driver doesn't pick someone up because they don't like the color of their skin. We use bias as a term to describe people's sort of bad behavior. That's problem one. Problem two is we compounded it with AI because AI actually has a technical term called bias, right? Weights and biases are actually two technical terms to describe the way that the model does something. And so we now operate in this world where when we talk about AI, we often talk about what's the expression, eliminating bias, right? Now, what I have to remind people of is that every living thing, and actually every thinking thing now, including AI, only works because of bias. It is, in fact, our bias, which is informed by two things, our genetic predispositions and our lived experiences that inform our intent and our desires, right? Which live sort of as a complex web of interests in our brain. And we wake up every day, we get out of bed, and we are all for a moment, in that very moment, the same. We want to brush our teeth, we want to go to the bathroom, we want to eat food. And then from there on, everything we do after that is slightly different because of our biases. And it is only because of our biases that we basically do not operate like zombies, right? That we don't all just pursue the most sort of basic needs. Our biases are informed, as I mentioned, by trillions of neurons, lived experiences, genetic predispositions. And as we go about the day, choosing to do things, what we discover sort of naturally and unnaturally is that we don't actually understand our bias. We operate in a world where we have come to understand that we ourselves know very little about why we do what we do. And in fact, one of the most remarkable things about being human, and often most frustrating, is the inexplicability of the human experience, both our own and others. Explaining our own behavior can be an impossible task, let alone a bunch of other people's. And we have created this sort of tacit agreement that we can wander the earth as roughly well-aligned creatures doing things with our bias that we cannot properly explain on the pursuit of building a better world. And I will remind people that most people's bias is actually quite good, right? Bias to say please and thank you, bias to give the seat to the pregnant woman, right? This is all bias. It's all very good. The incredible thing now is that we have discovered, as we talk about bias, that one of the hardest parts about the human bias problem is that we cannot explain ourselves. There is not enough therapy in the world, Kathy, for either you or I to unpack all of our bias in our brain. There's just not enough therapy, or psychedelics for that matter, to unpack all of the experiences that we have lived that inform all the stuff in our brain. It's actually locked away and protected in our interest. We don't really want to access our entire lives at once. Moreover, even if we could, we would never admit it, right? I would never stand here and say, Kathy, I just realized you remind me of a friend from high school who betrayed me. I'm just going to, I'm going to sort of ride out this podcast, but I'm going to not answer very thoughtfully. Like that might happen. That might actually happen, and in fact, does happen all the time. There's a Superior Court judge. I live, nearby, and some mornings I can tell he's having a bad day. He walks to the courthouse every day, and I can tell some mornings are having a bad day. He's never going to sit in that chair and say, "I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, so you're getting 6 months instead of 3." That happens. A cop is never going to pull someone over and say, "I'm going through a nasty divorce and I need to take it out on someone." That happens. And we have we've turned bias into a pejorative to describe inexplicability as a pejorative. What we really hate is that we cannot understand why people do awful things. And where we are now with AI is we are coming to realize that the scariest thing about AI, outside of an alignment issue, right? A machine that doesn't care about us or doesn't actually take our considerations and our values into account, is somehow just the cousin of it is a machine that can't explain why it's doing what it's doing. And what I argue is, in defensive bias, we don't actually want machines to not be biased. We want them to be explicable. We want them to solve the problem that we cannot solve for ourselves, which is that we wander the earth doing things that we cannot explain and even wouldn't even if we could. And we must now build machines that are making more and more complex, important decisions to explain these things such that we can trust them and we can feel like we live in a more explicable world. And I think the exciting thing actually about AI, when people are like, "Oh, we would never want an AI judge," I go, "Yeah, have you ever met a fucking judge?" Like, people are like, "Oh, do we really want AI, deciding insurance payouts?" And I'm like, have you ever met a claims adjuster? Like, these are people too. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying judges are bad. I'm just saying they're people. They're people who go through nasty divorces. They're people who have drug addictions, right? These are people who are sort of afflicted by the same issues that afflict a teenager. And we get a chance now not to build machines without bias, but to build machines that are very honest about why they arrive at a decision. And I think building a more explicable world is one of the great promises of AI. And the explain in defense of bias, I think is just this very important um, um, idea that people must start grappling with, such that instead of clamoring for no bias in the machine, what they clamor for or demand from the model manufacturers and from policymakers is explainability. Can this machine tell us all of the information that it used to arrive at this decision and map it out so that we know exactly how it got here?
Now, I knew you would disrupt this concept, Zach. Thank you for that. So, my very last question: we're entering and we are in an AI world. You just had a wonderful, beautiful daughter. What are your aspirations for your daughter growing up in an AI world? And how do you think about that?
Um, I finished the book as she was getting ready to be born. It was a very profound experience. I mean, every parent's been through this, so I don't need to explain. But people ask all the time, what do I want for her? And I basically what I try to answer it with, what do I want to impart to her, instead of trying to answer the life that I want her to live. I I see it as a moral obligation now to try to build a better world for her, at a local basis and a global basis. And that means doing things in the community in which we live, Santa Barbara, a community that I grew up in, that my mom grew up in, that my grandfather and parents contributed a bunch to. And we'll do everything I can to build a better community here. And then on a global basis, a lot of the work I do is trying to inspire optimism and hope, as you know. When it comes to values, I basically want Frankie, our daughter, to believe in sort of three things. One is a greater purpose and a higher power. The second is friends and family, and the importance of physical community, ideally outside. And the third is a love for nature. I think that if we can impart those values to her, then everything else will figure itself out. And critically, if she loves being outside with friends and family, then I don't really worry about the rules and the device exposure or not. I think the rest can figure itself out. It's just very important to me that she absolutely love being outside, and that she absolutely loved her friends and family.
Well, Zach, I hope that not only have you given hope and optimism to this audience, but that you're giving hope and optimism and community to both to your daughter and to the community around you, which I know you are, because everyone that we've seen you talk to is left inspired. So this is not just about small bits of understanding. It's about fundamentally changing your perspective and changing your point of view. And, taking that and operating ourselves, each of us changing a little bit the way we do things. So I want to thank you so much for your time, taking the time away from your daughter. I know she's only a few days old, and we totally appreciate it. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thanks for having me, Kathy.